All right, welcome again to our program on creating a backyard haven for fireflies. My name is Nick Stallman. I am the wildlife habitat educator here at Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania, where we like to connect people with birds and nature through our programs like today, as well as programs and projects like our backyard habitat program, which is something that I coordinate. If you are here for your education engagement portion of certification, please make sure to email me afterwards saying that you did attend this or watch the recording. But we are really going to be focusing on fireflies today. And this is a pretty fascinating topic, and it seemed like there was a lot of interest. We had a lot of people sign up and register for this. Our actual program, what we will be doing is more or less a crash course, so kind of Firefly 101. There are some other programs that we offer that will go into deeper detail on the natural history of fireflies, but I do want to go briefly over what exactly fireflies are, their life cycle, because it is important to create habitat that's appropriate for their entire life cycle. We'll also touch on the decline of firefly populations and why we should care about them, why fireflies matter. And then towards the end, we'll actually talk about firefly habitat essentials and things that you can do in your own backyard, both from planting perspective as well as just cultural changes that we can do to better serve our fun firefly friends. And as always, I'll add some resources that if you're inspired to look into more on this, we'll have plenty of cool books or websites for you to check out, as well as citizen science projects that you can get involved in. And there will be plenty of time at the end for questions. You can also throw them in the chat. The chat should go directly to me. So starting off with Firefly 101. First off, you might refer to them as fireflies or lightning bugs, but they are not a fly and they are not a bug. So they are, in fact, beetles. So they are beetles in the family Lampyridae. This is important distinction because beetles will have a specific type of life cycle that's different than flies and bugs. So they are beetles. Does it seem like we had a question pop in and it was, does it seem like there are more fireflies this year? Anecdotally, I do seem to see more than I had in previous years, but I also felt like last year there was a decent amount. So there are certain species that are doing well, but there's definitely some that we'll see that are kind of declining. So there's a vast variety of species of fireflies, and these are there I go. These are insects that occur on every continent except for Antarctica, and there's about 2,000 species described worldwide. So bring that home, and we have them present in 49 of the US states, as well as Puerto Rico and 11 provinces in Canada. There were two species that were introduced to Hawaii, but they haven't really established down there. So not all 50 states, but 49 of the states, as well as Puerto Rico, and we will have about 20 genera within North America, which has 180 species across those groups. And in Pennsylvania, we have around 30 species, including our state insect. Our state insect is Photorus pennsylvanica, also just known as the Pennsylvania firefly. There's something interesting about this that we'll discuss when we get to the decline, but this is our state insect, kind of appropriately named. And the life cycle that I alluded to. So beetles do go through complete metamorphosis, meaning there is an egg, then a larva. In fireflies, we also refer to these as glowworms. The larva then pupates into making a pupa, and finally it becomes the adulted, flighted firefly that we think of generally as fireflies. This entire life cycle can take anywhere from a couple of months with some species to a few years, with most spending about 1 to 2 years in the larval stage in those long-lived species. But again, there is a lot of variation among the different species, so we can kind of think of broadly the egg stage is something late summer. These are the female is laying the eggs in soil or leaf litter. It needs to be moist, undisturbed areas, and they're tiny, tiny little eggs. They're sometimes laid singly, sometimes in clusters, but what's really fun is that some of the eggs do glow. They do have a faint bioluminescence in some of the species. Eggs generally hatch within a month, and then we get into our larval stage. The larval stage is where most fireflies spend their life. This is the longest stage. In some species, again, it's like 1 to 2 years, and they are often called glowworms because a very large number of species do have a glowing larval state. So the same thing, it kind of glows on the abdomen, the back part of the insect. And these guys, the larval fireflies, are voracious predators. They feed on slugs, snails, worms, all sorts of soft-bodied invertebrates. And the larvae, are mainly nocturnal. So you don't really see them out during the day. You might happen upon them. But if you go out in like fall, early fall, maybe late summer, you kind of watch your grass, you'll occasionally see a little faint glow emanating from the bottom of those blades of grass. If you kind of investigate it, you'll see one of these larval fireflies, and we'll take some good looks at real photos of them on some of the future slides. And then sometime, depending on the species, the larva burrows into the soil to pupate, forms a small little chamber underground, transforms in like a caterpillar butterfly situation. This is kind of like the cocoon stage. So the pupa does not move. We have them up here at let's get the pointer on. So we got our little pupa right here. They don't really move, but they will glow. So there are occasionally times where people kind of dig up the soil doing some plantings or crack open a log and find some of these in a very rotted log. There's just these little semi-C-shaped critters in there that have some glow to them. So again, these guys will also glow. And then once they go through that complete metamorphosis, they turn into the flighted adult that has the elytra, which are the hard outer parts that cover the wing, and then they will have wings. And so this is usually the shortest stage. The adults don't last that long. Their main goal is to mate and reproduce. They usually only last a few weeks. Males flash in flight to attract females, and females usually respond with timed flashes from vegetation. So they don't generally fly and flash for the females. Some adults will feed on pollen and nectar, but most of them don't eat at all. They're only out there trying to reproduce. And again, a majority of the firefly's life is spent underground as the larva. So that means protecting healthy soil and the leaf litter is critical for their survival. Now, I've mentioned a lot about how they glow. This bioluminescence, that's the term that we give to any sort of creature, whether it's fireflies or some fungi. There's other insects that emit some sort of light reaction. This is a biochemical reaction, and it is a natural form of cold light. It does not give off heat like a light bulb, and the process is actually incredibly efficient. I've got a fun slide that kind of shows that, but the key enzyme is something called luciferase. Luciferase, it acts like a biological switch, kind of speeding up a chemical reaction that helps produce light when it reacts with a substrate called luciferin. So you have luciferin and luciferase that react in the presence of oxygen. And this is all happening in a special organ called the lantern. And as oxygen enters in and you have this reaction that's sped up with that enzyme luciferase all acting on the luciferin, it emits light. And this color, this light can vary with most what we see in our common ones is that nice yellow, and there are some greens around here or even a pale orange. There are some rare ones that have blue, especially in the tropics. There's a lot of these bluish light fireflies. Then again, this is incredibly efficient light. When it comes to our incandescent bulbs, they are about 10% efficient, meaning 90% of the energy used to form light in this light bulb is lost as heat, 90%. And I'm sure many of us have touched an incandescent bulb to go to change it after it goes out and it burns our finger. We know how much heat is given off by these. But even our LED lights, about 20% is lost as heat. And this is electricity, so it's a little bit different, but when we think of that luciferin reaction, it's like 99% efficient. It is pretty much no energy is lost to heat in this light production, which is pretty amazing considering all of our light production, we do lose a lot of heat. But kind of brings up the question of Won't this bring a lot of attraction to them? Uh, won't predators easily see this light and seek this out, this moving critter that they can put in their mouth? Well, the glowing light actually acts a lot like all those bright colors that we see on the poisonous animals. That glowing light does deter predators because it kind of tells them it's the signal that says, I'm going to taste bad if you eat me, or I'm going to make you throw up. Like you're going to get sick if you put me in your mouth. And this is actually compounded with most species have some sort of bright coloration, whether it's just these red dots on this larva. So here's our larval glowworm, or there's usually some nice lines on the elytra of the fireflies and that bright reddish orange head. That all kind of signals this high contrast signals warning of colors. Like these warning colors communicate, do not eat me. But what do they eat? Well, fireflies, especially their larvae, again, are voracious predators. They are just these little mini alien tanks that are covered in a hard plated exoskeleton to keep them protected. They're low to the ground, and that glow will actually kind of attract some of their prey. They're like, "Oh, what is that? Let me kind of get close." And then when they realize what it is and that it's moving, that they should probably run, it's too late. This larval firefly, this glowworm, is got their grips on them. They're going to start munching away. So these guys are eating some caterpillars, but they're also helping out our gardening friends. They're eating slugs, they're eating snails, they're eating some of those worms. And the adults, though, again, some do eat like a little bit of nectar and pollen, but what's really fun is there's some females in the Photurus genus that actually mimic the light pattern of other species to lure the males in so that they can eat them. So the females, again, they sit on vegetation and they flash their light in response to the males who are flying around and flashing. So this larger predatory firefly female in this one genus, she will sit there and mimic the female flash pattern of a different species to attract that male, the male of that species, to come in, and then she grabs them and eats them. But generally, our adult fireflies are not really eating too much. So that's our very brief Firefly 101. Again, we have some other programs that we do a little bit deeper dive. We really look at some of the different species around here, but I just wanted a very general overview of what fireflies are. So again, they are beetles. They do produce light, and a majority of their life stage is spent in that larval state where they're low to the ground, they're moving around in the soil, they do not fly around. So we'll move on to the decline of firefly populations. There is, uh, again, we did kind of have a question come up saying, like, we did see a bunch this year. Like, I personally have seen a lot in my own backyard. I hope that some of you have had similar experiences. And it can tend to just be a certain species that is doing very well. Overall, there is a big decline in firefly populations, but we can go, unfortunately, broader than this. It's not really a decline in firefly populations, it's a decline in insect populations. There is a lot of unfortunate news coming out of our studies in the insect world, with 28% of bumblebees are threatened, and many are experiencing range contractions, and more than 17% of North American butterflies are at risk, with monarchs having declined in the last 2 decades. There is some studies showing that there's a little bit of a bounce back, but who knows if it's enough. There are studies out of the UK where there's some very long data sets, like 25 plus years of data monitoring mostly natural areas as well as agricultural fields. So these devices were set up near ag fields, kind of hoping to passively trap some of the pest insects so that the farmers would know if there's a large abundance of certain pests in the area and they can plan for that. So these structures have been set up for a long time, and some researchers have taken a look at what has been getting caught in these passive traps, and eventually they kind of came to the conclusion that about 75% of the biomass of flying insects has declined. So in the past 25 years, they've lost 75% of the biomass of flying insects around. So that's a very large number. And that was a little bit on the conservative side of their estimates. Some of the timing was more 80%, depending on what time of year it was. For fireflies in particular, this IUCN Red List data is showing about 14% of the species are threatened, whether they're in vulnerable, endangered, or near threatened states. But this DD right here, 53% of them are DD. That is data deficient. That refers to a species where there's just not enough information to assess its risk of extinction. We just don't know enough about this. But if we were to extrapolate based off of what we do know, that would suggest that about a third of the firefly species in that data deficient, or just overall in the world, a third of them are at risk. In the US, we do have, this is a map from the Xerces Society that shows the number of threatened species per state. And we do have that one in Pennsylvania. And if you were really paying attention, you might recognize this scientific name, Photurus pennsylvanica. That is the Pennsylvania firefly. So the state insect that we have is actually threatened in our region. In fact, this is a little bit more complex because this is a species that we're really scientists, entomologists that study insects, and especially those that focus on fireflies, have realized that this species is a little bit more complex. In fact, they've created a complex of species that are so hard to kind of peel apart and figure out which one's actually truly Photurus pennsylvanica versus some similar looking species. So this is a bit more of a complex, but it's kind of hard to find. And so this is something where if we don't figure out what's going on before there's the actual decline, we may never know. And the data deficient map here. So this is showing the number of species per state and province of Canada where there are data deficient species. And I was talking to Nelson Milano, who's our entomologist here at ASWP, and he said that there's actually one funny theory on why there's so few data deficient species in the Northeast versus out west. And that's because we up here in the Northeast have a very good number of prestigious entomology departments. So it could just be that there's less data deficient ones here because we have a lot of entomologists out studying these in this region, and there's just less entomology departments out west. So that's kind of that overall decline. It's not looking great, but there are some threats, and we should label those out so we can try to figure out why we're seeing this decline. And as always, when it comes to living organisms, the biggest threat to them has been habitat loss, whether it's just new construction and residential development, but also tilling land for agricultural development is going to be disturbing that soil where the larval fireflies are at. And so all this disturbance to the ground is really going to impact our fireflies. And also that disturbance forms runoff and silt events where it pollutes our waterways. And if there is pooling and flooding in these areas, that soil, the fireflies want moist soil, but they don't want flooded soil. They don't have gills, so they can't really handle these flooded fields. And if the water pollution is just making it so that it's washing away all the substrate, we're also going to have less habitat for them there. And then the channelizing of waterways is just wearing away some of their habitat too. Light pollution is something that definitely affects our fireflies at the larval state too, but in the adults for sure. So these insects, they rely on those bioluminescent flashes to attract mates. And if they are getting distracted by artificial lights, they will actually fly towards it, thinking it could be one of their mates, and are off getting lost if it's a small light. But when it's all this light pollution above, or very bright street lights, they're essentially kind of confusing it for the moon. And they always want to have their back towards the moon. And so as they fly towards this moon, they're getting to the moon way quicker than they would ever expect. And so they try to right themselves, and they're caught in this endless loop of trying to right themselves towards that artificial light to make sure that they have their back towards it. And so trying to have less lights around in an area that there are fireflies can really help them. And we'll talk about that when we get to the creating your own backyard haven. Pesticide exposure is also a big threat to fireflies, like it is most insects. Pesticides use can definitely harm fireflies both directly and indirectly. Many pesticides are toxic, so those insecticides that are designed to kill beetles and grubs in the soil are going to affect our firefly larvae that are roaming around that same lawn. They're going to affect the same pupa that you're trying to target, or that people are trying to target with herbicide or insecticide sprays on their lawn to target beetle grubs. At the end of the day, fireflies, their pupa are beetle grubs. So they're going to be affected by that same insecticide. But even herbicide use can affect our insects with drift. So if we think of this as an herbicide here getting sprayed on this field, maybe controlling some weeds, if it's not done at an appropriate time of year, if there's high winds, that's going to drift off site. If it's not done during an appropriate timing regarding weather, the rain might wash it away outside. So even though that it was designed to be used on this specific place, and if applied right there, you could argue that it was a safe practice. If that herbicide gets off site, it's going to kill the plants nearby. So there might be a meadow nearby, there might be a nice field nearby, there might be a forest edge. And all those plants that could be affected by this herbicide will get affected in those drift events or runoff events. Invasive species will also be affecting fireflies with invasive plants, especially shrubby invasive plants like your privet, your multifloral rose, your bush honeysuckle. Those are going to be shading out the ground cover, altering those ground covers, those understories. This picture here, we actually have a thicket of, looks like some multifloral rose, privet, and then all this right here is stilt grass. So the stilt grass is going to clog out that understory. It's going to alter the soil conditions, and it's going to reduce the suitable habitat for these firefly to both forage in and just complete their life cycle. And now, while fireflies have those warning colors and the bioluminescent compounds are generally distasteful for birds, European starlings, which form these massive flocks, and they are these non-native aggressive birds, they descend on fields in such large numbers, eating every single invertebrate that they can find, that they can devastate larval populations of fireflies, whether by actually consuming them or just damaging them enough that that larva can no longer live. And there's also some evidence that suggests imported red fire ants, the ones that make those mounds that if you step on them, you get real mad because they start biting like crazy. So these non-native, they're from South America. These fire ants, if there's large amounts of populations of them in an area where you would have fireflies, you tend to have less or no fireflies. So it does seem to be that these could be attacking the larval fireflies or maybe some of the underground stages like the eggs or the pupa. Climate change is, of course, a giant one that's affecting our fireflies. Frequent forest fires, or what I should say is wildfires, are destroying habitat and reducing effectiveness of chemical cues due to smoke, but especially with the habitat loss, because these high intensity wildfires, not the prescribed burns, which can be used to really alter wildlife habitat for the better, but these wildfires that are run rampant because of adverse like dried conditions and mismanagement of wildlands, these will completely destroy the undergrowth. These will completely destroy the ground layer, and those high intensity burns set things back way too much. Some areas are experiencing heavy rains and flooding, and some of these areas aren't used to that. And so we're flooding mating sites for fireflies. And then, of course, you have the reverse of that with warmer temperatures impacting species range because these guys need those moist conditions, and we're seeing a lot of drying events and droughts in some areas. So, those are our threats. Let's kind of brighten it up and talk about why they matter, why we should care about these things. I'm hoping that you all are here because you already have some appreciation. I just want to point out some of the other things that they do. And that includes pollination. So I put pollinator potential. Now, some adult fireflies do visit flowers. They will feed on that nectar or pollen. In doing so, they inadvertently transfer the pollen from one to the other. So they are pollinating. They're not the big ones, though. Their role is relatively minor, but that is still something that's important. So they're not like the big heavy hitters of bees and butterflies, and it varies from species to species, but they still do have pollinator potential, but they are definitely proper predators. They feed on all those soft body pests like slugs and snails, insect larvae, and they just help naturally control populations that can damage plants that we plant as well as the natural plants. And so by supporting fireflies, gardeners can encourage kind of a built-in form of pest management without relying on chemicals. They're also possible prey. So, despite the distasteful chemicals in them and those warning colors, they will still find that something will still find them tasty. And let me get rid of this. So, this is a frog. I found this video. So, some frogs definitely eat fireflies, as we can see in this little tree frog, who is probably confused on why people can see him so well. But again, he ate that firefly, and I don't know how long that poor little firefly is going to be glowing, but it won't be too long. So some amphibians, frogs, a lot of spiders, and even some birds beyond the starlings have kind of adapted to tolerate and just not care about these defensive chemicals. And that does make fireflies, with their capability of being predators and prey, a very important, if selective, part of the food web. And the next slide is just the same thing in case that video didn't play. I never trust videos, so. They're also just important indicator species. Their presence signals kind of healthy, pesticide free, that usually has minimal disturbed environments and usually some sort of healthy habitat layering to it. And this is one that I really just I didn't know about some of this. So they're medical marvels. The enzyme luciferase is used a lot in scientific research, and that chemical has actually been so again, the luciferase is the enzyme that helps in the bioluminescent reaction. And it's used in biomedical research to track gene expression and has been developed into assays to detect cancer cells and monitor infections in real time. Luciferase is also used in, so we have these testing devices here, and luciferase is used as a biosensor to detect toxins or pollutants in the soil and water for environmental monitoring. And one of the ways this works is essentially that chemical reaction needs ATP. So the energy that our cells are using is ATP, and it's a biological thing. And so some of these detectors are looking for biological contamination. So this can be used in hygiene and food safety testing, and that it's essentially getting put into the area where there shouldn't be biological contamination. And if there is biological contamination, the ATP in that contaminant is allowing this reaction to occur. And so all these tests have kind of been developed around the luciferase. But then that made me wonder, how are they getting this? Like, I'm a little worried about how they're obtaining the luciferase. And the traditional method actually did involve collecting fireflies, particularly Photinus pyralis, which is our common eastern firefly. This is usually the one that you're seeing in your backyard. It's also known as the Big Dipper because when the male flies, he drops down and then comes back up. So he'll make a little J as he's flying. So the Big Dipper is a very, very common firefly, and they used to capture them and basically extract the luciferase from their abdomen from that little lantern. However, synthetic production has become more common, especially due to concerns about firefly population, and also luciferase genes are synthesized and inserted into bacteria like E. coli, and then they make the E. coli produce the proteins and everything they need, and they just harvest it from the E. coli. So we see E. coli streaks containing luciferase. And yeah, so absolutely insane to me. And then, of course, there's that cultural component. This is something that a lot of us grow up appreciating all over the world. Most people have a fond memory of sitting out in the summer and watching those fireflies or catching them in the jar or just getting fascinated when one lands on you and starts glowing. Or I know my big thing was when I first found out what glowworms were and seeing that little bit of a glow in the grass lawn. Some of you have been out with me and see how excited I get when I see that glow, and I stop everything that I'm doing just so I can like get down on my hands and knees in the dark and try to find this little alien tank glowworm going around hunting slugs and snails. And there's a real nice quote, so have not the fireflies in the meadow relation to the stars above. When the darkness comes, we see stars beneath also. This is from Henry David Thoreau's own personal journal. And it is, we have the stars above and we have the stars below with these fireflies. And it's a very beautiful thing. And so that is, at the end of the day, why fireflies matter to me. And it might be a little selfish, but if it's this selfish desire to want to continue to have this experience that makes you want to create firefly habitat, I say go for it. And that is where we're going to get into the firefly habitat essentials and what you can do in your own backyard to kind of make sure that you continue to have a haven or create a haven for fireflies. So let's talk about what they need. They're going to need shelter, so they need some sort of native vegetation usually, but especially leaf litter, some sort of soil, and we need dark nights. So they need this for that proper bioluminescent communication. We're also going to need some good food, so we have to have some soft-bodied invertebrates like slugs, snails, worms, caterpillars. They're going to need some moisture. They don't want to desiccate, they or their prey items. So we need this moist environment. So what can we do? Up first, turn off the lights. So let's avoid this structure on the bottom here where we have spotlights pointing upwards. I completely understand that many of us would like to have lights on, especially for safety concerns. So it is kind of something where can we consider a motion sensor? Can we try to make it a warm colored light so we can avoid the bright blue LED lights? Better yet, try to do the lights that are red. Those insects cannot see that part of the light spectrum, so red lights are very safe. So having them on motion sensors or having them come off at a certain time, that all is very helpful, or at the very least, having some sort of roofing structure so that the light is pointed downwards. That's still going to affect our larval fireflies and to some degree the other fireflies, but having these spotlights point up is very detrimental to both fireflies and some of the other things that are happening outside at night, including birds. So definitely trying to limit or just completely turning off our lights. That's the best case scenario. So trying to turn off lights or at least trying those warm colored yellow lights or red filters. And it's not just outdoor lights, but trying to keep those lights off inside or keeping curtains on. So if you're inside doing stuff at night, and especially like I get it, people live lives. So having curtains on those windows, trying to make sure to not leave lights on inside the house where that light can escape outside. That's all stuff that can impact these species. And then a big one, leaving the leaves. So leaves provide shelters for during the winter, especially these overwintering larvae. So most of our fireflies overwinter as that larval state, and they survive by tucking themselves into the leaf litter. And so this really benefits those fireflies to just leave the leaves where they are. If you need to move them, try to use it as a mulch. This is an incredibly, really, really good mulch. Leaf litter is some of the best mulch that you just can get for free. Start putting this in your garden bed. I promise you it works just as well for weed control. It's putting nutrients back into the soil. They will degrade. Like this is something that will naturally kind of turn back into real healthy soil. And if you can leave it intact, that's where our fireflies, again, we have fireflies, we have some cocoon thing, some moths and cocoons, we have other beetles all kind of nesting in big piles of leaf litter. So if you go over it with a mower, there's a good chance you're decimating some of those populations. So it's better just leave this stuff intact where it lies. But if you can at least kind of pick it up, shovel it over to a garden bed or shovel it off to the side. But I promise you, unless you have a heavy oak grove in your lawn, if you just let these leaves stay where they are, they will degrade by the time the grass starts growing. It's okay if the leaves are on top of your grass in the fall and winter. The grass is dormant. So it does not need the sun at that time. Unless you have a real thick oak leaf drop, these leaves will degrade. They will get brought down by earthworms. And the whole time you have this amazing ecosystem that's happening in your own yard with stuff that's surviving that winter. I guess interesting. So right here, reduce mowing. I don't know what happened to the slide. The reduce mowing is kind of straightforward and obvious though. It if you need to like mow the lawn, try to do it at the higher setting, but also consider leaving a patch just unmowed. Whether it's just that the corner of a hill that you just hate doing, it always causes the lawnmower to turn sideways, or you have to like start sweating like crazy just to get up there. Leaving that part untouched. Let that grow up. It's giving you a little bit more habitat. These larval fireflies are roaming through all your grass looking for the prey items. So this is a very important foraging ground for them. So the more grown-up grass you have in the area, the better for them. And you could also just consider leaving one patch of your lawn unmowed towards the back and maybe mow it once a year and then let some other patch kind of grow up to make sure that you don't end up with a thicket of woody invasives. And then avoiding pesticides. So this diagram here is showing how fireflies can be affected by direct contact with an insecticide or pesticide by spraying them right there. Or if you are spraying for, let's say, some sort of aphid pest and you spray on there and then the firefly lands later, this is probably still active and that firefly will be affected. Or if this is a bee in this case, if it happens to take something from the plant that you just sprayed, pollen or a fruit or a seed, it's going to bring that herbicide with it. And then just spraying lawn treatments. We have, again, a lot of our female firefly is going to be laying eggs in the soil. Our pupa is going to be emerging from the soil. So breaking that soil barrier where there could be some contamination from the pesticide is going to affect them. So trying to limit the pesticides, especially things, again, if we are targeting grubs in our soil, we will be targeting firefly. So the beetle grubs that are targeted in lawn treatment also include fireflies that are in the area. And then plant native. So this is when we're going to kind of get into some of the plants. But the thing is, it's not about specific plants. It is about layers. You really want to focus on having layers. Now, I get that everyone can't have this in their own backyard. Space is limited. There might be regulations. So ideally, we would have our nice overstory layer, our understory layer, our shrub layer, and our ground layer all in the same environment. But even within what you can work with, if all you can do is ground layer and you just have some container planters, as long as you have some taller plants and some shorter plants, you have some layering. So it's all about focusing on layers, but there is some other considerations for fireflies. They benefit from dark canopies. Pines and other evergreen conifers provide kind of this crucial canopy component that helps block artificial light. So it helps diminish the effects of light pollution. And the shadowy canopies, especially in eastern white pine, it gets so dark up there that the firefly females, the ones that are perched on the vegetation, tend to hang out in this because they can start displaying their own flashing earlier in the evening because it gets so dark that it's dark enough up there before the sun's truly set. So these evergreen conifers really help create a perfect backdrop for the fireflies and a safe place for them to hang out during the day. Eastern white pine is one that's good for well-drained, slightly acidic soils. It's good in full sun to partial shade. And then over here, another option is also our eastern red cedar. This thrives in dry, rocky, or poor soils. It loves full sun and is highly drought resistant. So this is a tree that grows in some tough sites. And we also would like to see heavy leaf fall. So having those trees make all that leaf litter is going to help out our fireflies. I mentioned oak leaves. Oak leaves are one of the hardier leaves. They tend to stick around the longest. And so those large leaves that fall create thick leaf litter. It helps hold in moisture. It provides essential shelter for them in the wintertime, foraging habitat for them in the summertime. And this oak tree is also going to be supporting tons of other organisms. White oak is a great oak to go with. The acorns are easy to consume by a lot of wildlife. There's a lot of host species potential with butterflies and moths on this guy. It's also a very versatile tree, tolerates a wide variety of soil and sun conditions. And American sycamore is also worthy of note because it has some large leaves. So sycamore is going to be dropping a bunch of leaf fall, but also just large leaves. So that's large surface area of foraging habitat and shelter. Sycamore is also one that tolerates a lot of conditions. So this is a riparian species. It's naturally kind of found at the creek's edge, at the edge of a lake. And that's not because it wants to be there. It's just tolerant of very poor soil conditions. So if it's by a creek or a lake that's prone to flooding, as that water rises up, it takes away the topsoil and all those great nutrients there, leaving some pretty poor soil behind. So sycamore thrives in these poor soil environments. And it is one of the reasons why it's used as a street tree because we have a lot of poor urban soil that it's okay growing in. And then bridging that vertical gap between our overstory and ground layer with some understory trees, some small trees. These also you can kind of consider creating a healthy regeneration of canopy trees. So picking some shade tolerant species to put underneath your large trees like American beech, shade tolerant species, red maple, shade tolerant species that can kind of grow underneath the canopy of a larger tree, and if that larger tree fails, it will get the red maple or American beech will get released and grow to be the new canopy tree. So we can think of this layer as either trees that just never really get that big or some healthy regeneration of canopy trees. But this helps bridge the gap between that ground and canopy layer for fireflies looking to land a display, while also kind of just ensuring a cool environment throughout the entire area. Our two species here we have serviceberry or shadblow serviceberry. So this prefers moist, well-drained soils. Does really good in full sun, but it can tolerate some partial shade. This is a woodland edge species, but you can also put it in open landscape, but you naturally kind of find this right at the edge of a forest. Then we also have our witch hazel, good for acidic soils, and it's going to be partial to full shade. So this is an ideal woodland species. It can tolerate growing underneath trees as well. So it's more of a shrubby tree, and we have a lot of potential with this one and some beautiful fall foliage and fall flowers, if you believe it or not. And then we also have are dense shrubs. So again, this is kind of like the large trees, the canopy trees that are dropping a lot of leaves. You don't have room for a large canopy tree, consider one of these shrubs that have some dense foliage. These help create shady and humid microhabitats. They'll have heavy leaf fall from the dense foliage. And so this is creating some quality larval firefly habitat. We have button bush over here. This is the true butterfly bush. This guy right here is going to attract so many butterflies. This thrives in moist to wet soils. Full sun, partial sun, doesn't really like shade too much. This is generally found at the edge of ponds and creeks, and this will provide so much nectar for pollinators. These flowers will be vibrating, and then valuable cover for birds and other wildlife. Your spice bush over here, this also thrives in kind of moist, well-drained soils as well, and it will tolerate some shade. In fact, it tolerates full shade. This is a species that you will consistently find in the woods underneath closed canopies. So this is a great species for shady areas. then you want to attract some of their prey. So you can't, it's not quite like butterflies where you put down or milkweed and you're going to get monarchs, or a spice bush and you're going to see spice bush swallowtail. There isn't like a firefly plant, but you can provide these habitat areas. And in this case, you can attract some of their prey. So they're going to want to see those caterpillars. They're going to want to see some of the slugs that are eating these leaves here. They want to see all those soft-bodied invertebrates. So by planting a variety of native ground covers, you're going to have their prey that they will eat, and they will help create a healthy balance in that ecosystem. So we have over here is an awesome shady ground cover. So big leaf aster is just if you're wanting to kind of cover an area with some native foliage and get some of these nice delicate flowers in the summer, start looking for big leaf aster. It thrives in part to full shade. It does kind of want that moist, well-drained soil, and it's great for woodland edges or underneath shady garden areas underneath trees. And we also have wild bergamot. So this is going to want some full sun. Does well in kind of medium dry to moderately moist soil. I have seen this grow in some pretty dry conditions as well. It's quite tolerant of a variety of conditions, and it's very attractive to pollinators, including hummingbirds. But it's going to bring in some caterpillars that those larval fireflies are going to want, and it grows pretty dense. Both these provide some great hunting cover for our fireflies. And speaking of hunting grounds, so we can also think of some of that lower ground cover that really helps maintain those moist microhabitats. And golden ragwort over here on the right is such a great versatile plant. It grows best in moist, rich soils, kind of in part to full shade, but it can tolerate full sun and adapts well to kind of average moisture soil. So this isn't going to do you very good if your soil is completely dry, but the fireflies were probably avoiding that site anyway. But this does, again, moist, rich soils. You get some really beautiful yellow flowers in the springtime, and it's great for your damp woodland areas. We also have wild ginger. This is going to be another good one for full, really deep shade. It's the ideal for kind of shady understory native woodland gardens. Both of these are going to create some great habitat for those larval fireflies. And our native grasses. So this is not only just another attractive ground cover option, but their clumping growth forms an ideal microhabitat for a variety of invertebrates. As it kind of clumps and falls over, it creates little tunnels for a lot of different movement, and their dense root systems really promote healthy soil. They support populations of small invertebrates that those fireflies are going to be eating. And some of the species, when it clumps over and falls, it's kind of a real nice place for our fireflies to land and display. So this is adding some native grasses to your gardens or your lawn is a perfect way to benefit fireflies, but also a variety of wildlife. Little blue stem over here on the left, it's gonna want it's gonna be fine in dry soil to average moisture soil. It does kind of need to be well drained. It doesn't want to be puddled up. It will thrive in full sun. But then for our shady environments, you can't go wrong with Pennsylvania sedge. So part shade to full shade. It can actually tolerate some pretty dry soil to moderately moist soil. And this will spread by rhizomes kind of slowly. So it will slowly just fill in an area. And it's a kind of a ideal way to replace lawn underneath a tree in a shady woodland garden. And with that, we'll get into some of our resources. So those were kind of the big topics on what you can do for your backyard haven for fireflies. Again, reducing the lights, trying to make sure that we have a variety of layers of plant types from up high to down low, whether you can do that in a small container setting or full scale forest down to ground level setting. Having different layers is really going to benefit them. Protecting the soil by making sure leaves stay around when they fall or piled up so that there's overwintering habitat for our larval fireflies and there's prey items for them to go after, and trying to avoid our pesticide use in areas that we're trying to promote fireflies. And we'll go into resources with one of the books that I really enjoyed was Fireflies, Glowworms, and Lightning Bugs by Lynn Pearson Faust, Really great book, goes into a lot of detail on fireflies of Eastern North America, and it's just very well written. It's pretty easy to digest. You can learn a lot from this book. Definitely check it out at your local library or get purchase one and just dive in. You'll have a lot of fun with it. Xerces Society, where I did get some of the maps that were shown during this presentation, is a great conservation organization for insects, and I highly recommend if you want to learn more state of fireflies of the United States and Canada, this publication is from Xerces Society. It's completely free. You can read the PDF. It goes into a lot of details as well as conservation recommendations for fireflies. So Xerces Society in general is just a great organization, and I highly recommend this State of the Fireflies publication if you'd like to learn more about fireflies. Firefly Atlas is one of the citizen science projects. So Firefly Watch, which was done last was by Mass Audubon, is no longer being conducted. So Firefly Atlas is a different citizen science project that is being done, and this is one that highly recommend checking out. There's a lot of really great resources at fireflyatlas.org. You can learn a lot. The project itself has focal species of fireflies that they are looking for observations on, and they have a protocol where you can become the observer for it, but they are not in our area. So we do not have the focal species that they are looking for, at least not currently. They do have a way where you can report observations. So if you do see fireflies, you can just report sightings of fireflies with your photos. And with that, I would also kind of recommend getting involved with Fireflies International Network. They have an iNaturalist project where you can do a similar thing. So they are keeping track of firefly observations. They have a United States uh, project, but they have over 200,000 observers with 500 species that have been observed through their project. So whenever you do see these fireflies, you can try to get it submitted onto this iNaturalist project. If you aren't familiar with iNaturalist, definitely check it out. It is a free citizen science tool that also helps you identify any living organism by taking photos of it, where you can then submit it and people can agree or disagree with your observation, so you get some feedback on your uh, observation and the identification of it. And then once it becomes research grade, where a certain number of people have agreed on it down to species, it can be pulled into data sets. And with that, I will pause the recording and we will go into questions. So